Hey everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. So over the last year or so here, I have been in what some might consider a bit of a reading slump. So if you look back at my Goodreads challenges over the past few years, all the way from 2019 through 2021, I have very close to 100 books. In one of those years, I even went over 100 books in the year. And so I was doing great, reading a ton. If you look at last year's number though, that went down to about 45. So I didn't even hit half of what I did in the year prior, which is a little bit disappointing. And I think a lot of the reason is just because I've been reading a lot of things that I haven't been loving, and so it hasn't gotten me super excited about moving on to the next book. So this year, I am also going really slow through some books, but I did finish about 4 or 5 books here. And so today I figured I would just talk about them, share my thoughts with them quickly with you guys, kind of like what I was doing with my 2022 catch-up. But this time we're going to look at some books. These are not 2022 books, I should mention. A lot of them are much older. Some of them are a little more recent. They're kind of all over the place, but it's ones that I've read so far this year. So let's do this, guys. If you have a quick second, though, please hit that like button down below. That engagement really does help me out. But with that said, let's not waste any more time at all. Let's dive right into 4 book reviews of some recent reads. Okay, so first up on the docket today is a book from 1974. This is Let's Go Play at the Adams, and this one is written by Mendel W. Johnson. So this one got a lot more popular again recently because of the fact that it was included in the Paperbacks from Hell book that was very popular a couple of years ago. So fortunately, I was able to find this one before the price ended up going up on it. It's actually not too bad right now. You can pick this up for usually under $20 from what I was seeing on eBay. But yeah, I ended up picking it up years before that because I was big into the Goodreads forums way back when, and this was I'm talking 2010 era, and that's when I was really collecting a lot of books, and so I was trying to find new horror books, and this one was one of those that came up. I happened to find it at my local used bookstore that was in Morgantown, West Virginia, where I went to grad school, and so I found this one along with some others that ended up being within that Paperbacks from Hell book. But while I do have this one in the physical format, I did read this one via Audible. I did pick up the audiobook when it was on sale, I don't know, a couple months back. And so with Let's Go Play at the Adams, we are following our main character is the babysitter. She is there to babysit these 2 kids for a week. It's at the Adams house. The family, or the parents have gone out of town for a week. The problem is, though, there are some friends that live around these 2 kids, and they like to play this game where they tie somebody up and kind of do weird things with them. Well, of course, that's what's going to happen with this. You can see in the picture here, the babysitter is going to get tied up, and things are going to slowly escalate to become deeper and darker and more disturbing as the book goes on. Now, it's not really fair to compare this book to another book, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it a lot in this review just because I always saw this book kind of next to Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door as listed as one of the most disturbing books of all time. Well, I can say without a doubt, Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door is a better book, and it is more disturbing than Let's Go Play at the Adams. Now, that's not to say this is not a disturbing book. It has very graphic content in it. It is not going to be for everyone by any stretch of the imagination. There is, torture, assault, murder, things like that, all in this book. All done by children. I believe the youngest person in this is one of the Adams kids, and I want to say she's 8 or 9. She's a little girl. And then there is as old as, I believe, an 18-year-old girl is part of this as well. Our babysitter is in her 20s. She's going to college at this point in her life. And so those are the characters that we're following here. And I think So let me start off by saying I think the book is relatively well written. It is very much of its time, and so it doesn't hold up quite as well when it comes to how the treatment of women and even the treatment of mental health aspects in this book. That does not hold up well in this. So just keep that in mind if that's something that bothers you when you go back to read older stories. But outside of that, I do think that the writing is done relatively well. Now, why I didn't find this one quite as disturbing is simply because I couldn't quite get in with the story as well as I was able to with The Girl Next Door. So The Girl Next Door does have a leg up because that is actually based on a true story. So these were real situations. Obviously, dialogue and things like that is not necessarily from the real story, but the situation is real. And why that one works so well and why it's so disturbing, to me at least, is because there is one adult that is kind of manipulating and controlling all aspects of this, where the kids kind of, they do take over at points and do disgusting things, but it's all okayed, I guess, by an adult. Where here, we just have a bunch of children. So one of my big issues with this are just the plot holes that I found going through it. I just had a very hard time believing that no adult would approach this situation at all. And even when they do have that happen, it's just the way it's handled does not seem realistic to me at all. The other thing is that with Girl Next Door, you have one sadistic human being that kind of trains or coaches the children to be sadistic, whereas in this one, we're set up in a situation where, like, it just happens to be that there are like 3 or 4 sociopathic children that happen to live near the Addams house. And so that's what kind of kicks off this entire thing and drives it, obviously makes it go deeper and darker as the story progresses. So I just had a hard time buying into that, whereas I could buy into Girl Next Door. It just felt more realistic. And again, I know one is based on a true story, unfortunately, and the other is just a pure work of fiction, but still, that's why this will not be considered my most disturbing book ever. That absolutely goes to The Girl Next Door, which I think is just a better book overall. Very, very messed up in every imaginable way. But I do think that book is better written than Let's Go Play at the Addams. I have a really hard time justifying if this is something that's worth reading or not. This one, and frankly, The Girl Next Door as well, just because it's such a disturbing idea and like such a screwed up situation that doesn't have any like hope with it at all as the story progresses. Like, there's not a lot of positivity to grab from the story. So like, what's the point of reading it? And I struggle with that. I don't have an answer to it, but if you're someone who is interested in trying to disturb themselves as best they can, then something like this would be something that you might be interested in. Now, if you were only going to read one disturbing book this year, I would absolutely recommend it be The Girl Next Door. But if you've already read that or you don't have any interest in that because it is based on a true story, then Let's Go Play at the Addams would do a decent job as a kind of second place disturbing book for me, at least. And so, yeah, so this was not a terrible book by any stretch of the imagination. And I think when I reviewed it initially, or when I talked about it on my Goodreads account initially, I gave it 3.5 stars. But honestly, looking back at it, I've already forgotten so much of what went down here over the past, whatever it's been, month or 6 weeks since I finished it, that I don't think it has the lasting power like something like Girl Next Door. And so because of that, I think I'm going to lower the rating on this one a little bit. So I'm going to give Let's Go Play at the Addams by Mendel W. Johnson 2.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is a book called The Lake, written by Richard Lehman, and I use the term written by extremely loosely because I didn't realize it as I was heading into this one, but this book was actually cobbled together after Richard Lehman passed away, and it was based on like the notes or the outline that he had of this story, and they ended up creating this book surrounding it, and oh boy, what an atrocity of a book this was. This one was terrible. So I ended up reading this one via audiobook thanks to Hoopla. So fortunately, I didn't spend any money on it, which is a positive thing. I borrowed it from my library, essentially. And with The Lake, we are like, it's such a weirdly set up book. So we start off by following this teenage girl. She lives with her mom. Her mom is Lee. She owns this really fancy restaurant in the city that they live in. She ends up going out with her boyfriend one night, and her boyfriend ends up murdered by some lunatic in the woods. And so it starts off as like a slasher book, which is exactly what I want when I read a Richard Lehman story. It's just kind of crazy fun slasher, but done in book form. And so that's how it started off. Things were going good. It's, you know, who killed them or who killed the boyfriend and why. Well, that is kind of revealed early on, and that's when things really start to take a weird turn. At one point, there's this flashback that lasts like 15% of the book. Like, it lasts a very long time. One of the longer flashbacks I think I've ever read in a book, in terms of like, that's not the entire book, if that, you know what I mean. It was just weird how it was set up. But anyway, we go back in time to when Lee was a child. So the mother, when she was a kid and she was at the lake, the titular lake, she ends up meeting this guy, and this is how her daughter is conceived. Well, he ends up dying this weird death. And so that's all going to be tied in together, sort of, but not really, with the who murdered the boyfriend aspect of it. Like, the plot line on this is just all over the place. I cannot give you a succinct synopsis because it's just all over. Like, it makes no sense at all. So admittedly, I was having fun with this at the beginning. I was thinking, yeah, this is not like bad. This is interesting. I'm curious how this is going to play out. Admittedly, the dialogue was kind of iffy and questionable. The character choices were a little questionable, but I had no idea where this thing would go. Frankly, this is one that when I was at like 75%, I thought to myself, why am I wasting my time? Why am I wasting my life listening to this book when there are so many other things I could be reading? But then I thought, well, I've already made it 75% of the way through. I might as well just finish it now because I've read so few books this year. Like, this at least needs to be finished so I can count it as a book read. And so I did. I powered through to no gain whatsoever. The characters in this are not realistic at all. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a slasher book. It doesn't need to be deep. It doesn't need to have deep characters for me to appreciate it. But at least in life or death situations, don't have laughable moments, laughable character choices that make absolutely no sense at all. It was just so frustrating to read this. The dialogue between the characters gets worse as the book goes on. The character decisions get worse as the book goes on. The plot just gets more muddied and ridiculous and absurd as the story goes on. This is just not a good book by any stretch of the imagination. I was honestly surprised how many positive reviews I saw of this on Goodreads, which, like, to each their own. If you love it, that's awesome. I'm glad you do. But for me, I thought this was one of the worst books I've read in quite some time. So I guess I'll just leave it there. I do not recommend this. If you want to read Richard Lehman, do not start with The Lake. I cannot remember the title of the other book I've read from him, but it was just bonkers, over the top, super gory and bloody and fun and crazy. Not a good book, probably, by, any objective standard, but I enjoyed it. And that's what I was hoping to get with The Lake. But, oh man, this one was a major shame. So, very disappointed in The Lake. So I ended up giving The Lake by Richard Lehman 1 out of 5 stars. Next up is another one that I read thanks to Hoopla, so I did the audiobook on this one as well. This is The Nightmare Room, and it's written by Chris Sorensen. So this is actually book 1 of the Messy Man trilogy. And this is a book that I've seen recommended from Rachel over at the Shades of Orange so many times over the years. I looked at the book, it was like under 7 hours. It is a super short book. It was like 6 hours in some length, I don't remember exactly. And so I figured, yeah, this will be a nice, quick, easy read. And now, this is a book that I was really enjoying for like the first 75% of it, but then at the end it kind of lost me a little bit. Things got a little bit like more complicated than I thought they should be for a book like this, and so it ended up losing me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, this is a haunted house story or a demonic possession story. We follow our main character. So I'll also mention first, Chris Sorensen also narrates the book. My thought is that he might be an audiobook narrator and an author professionally, because he did a great job with the narration on this. And our main character in the book is also a professional audiobook narrator. So I just feel like maybe that's what he does for a living. So I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, we open the story and we are following this little boy. I believe he ends up wetting his bed. And so the dad gets super mad at him, sends him downstairs into the titular nightmare room. Well, then we jump ahead many, many years, and we are now with our main storyline, our main characters, a husband and wife. Something tragic has happened in their life that is kind of unraveled as the story goes on, or unveiled, I guess, as the story goes on. And they are, well, first off, they think they're moving into their parents' home, the main character's parents' home, but it turns out it's not actually that house that's available to live in. It is this other rental house that they had, which of course is going to coincide with the little boy's story at the beginning of the book. So they end up moving in. He makes his audiobook narration studio in that same room. And of course, crazy weird things are going to start happening at the house. house. The Gray Man, as they call him, appears very early on in this, which it's only like a 7-hour book, so it's very short. And so he appears early on, and things are going to pick up from there. Like I said, it's a haunted house story or a demonic possession story, so all those similar tropes that you would expect from those are going to be prevalent here. Here's a story that I really enjoyed the characters. They felt a lot more realistic than the book I just finished with The Lake, and I liked the dialogue between the two. I really liked the husband and wife's dynamic. I thought they just felt genuine and kind of sincere as the story progressed. There is an old high school friend that's brought into the picture that the wife ends up working with, and I thought their dynamic was really interesting. I wanted to know like what was going to happen with their story. I was thinking maybe it would go this way. It sort of kind of does, but doesn't. And so I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And really, I thought everything was well done here. This is a well-written book. It's just when it got to the end, I feel like it got a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. Now, maybe I was distracted or whatever the case was. I just wasn't understanding it as well as, you might or somebody else might. But still, I felt like it could have simplified things a little bit as it reached the conclusion. This is a book. It is short. So I think another 10% on this book really could have done it well to help flesh out that ending a little bit more, so it wasn't so rapid fire kind of crazy as the book came to a conclusion. Now, this is one, like I said, there are 2 more stories in this trilogy. I honestly don't know if I'm going to continue though, because I don't know, like, how you continue this story. Is it going to be different characters? Like, what's going to happen here? And then 2, like, do I care to continue? So I think what I need to do is just read the synopsis of the second book, and then that'll help me decide if this is a series I want to continue on from there. So this is a book. This is a well-written book. I think this is a pretty good book. I just wish it would have had a little bit more time at the end to kind of pad things out a little bit or kind of smooth things out so that it didn't feel so jarring when you get all these reveals as the book comes toward its conclusion. And there are some big reveals in this that did take me, like, threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting some of the things in here at all. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. So this is a good one. It's just not as good as I was kind of hoping it would be. And not as the final 25% is not as good as the first 75% led me to believe. So I'm hoping that if I do continue, maybe it'll kind of correct itself because it'll lengthen it and we'll get more of these characters potentially. I don't know. We shall see. So I ended up giving The Nightmare Room, written by Chris Sorensen, 3.5 out of 5 stars. All right, so I'll wrap things up here with the book that I think will probably have the least universal appeal out of at least probably those watching this channel. But this is We Spread, written by Ian Reid. So this is one that I actually borrowed from my local library, and I read it in relatively quick time, given how quickly or how long it usually takes me to read a physical book. So this is one that I did read in the physical form. So the reason I say that I feel like this book will appeal to the least number of people is just because it is extremely slow moving. We are following this elderly woman. She's in her late 80s. Her name is Penny. We are following her story basically from when we introduce her. She lives in her own apartment. An accident happens, and then she ends up going into this home where she believes that things around her aren't quite what they seem. That's pretty much the story. And so as it's being sold, and even as I'm trying to sell it, it might feel like it's a horror book or a thriller book, but it doesn't. It's really not that. It is much more than that. There's more to this than meets the eye, I guess I'll say. And so because of that, if you read the first 10, 15 pages of this book and you think, wow, this is really boring, it doesn't pick up. It doesn't get any faster. It just kind of continues down that path. But what I loved about this was just Ian Reid's writing style. He has beautiful, he just weaves a beautiful narrative here. The way that we follow this lonely, elderly woman through life is just fascinating to me. I was hooked right from the opening chapter. I picked up the book during a commercial break during like AEW Dynamite, I believe it was. And I was hooked. Like, I didn't want to put it down. I was just enjoying myself right from the get-go. And it's because of that beautiful prose that Ian Reid is able to share in this book. And so this is one that, like, I didn't know where it was going, but I was hooked the entire time. I didn't care that it wasn't speeding up at all because I just loved our main character. She was with this man for an extremely long time. They were never married, but it was a long-term live-in boyfriend. And she ends up, just going to the park at the beginning and just her day grocery shopping and how she handles things. And then, like I said, she has an accident and is taken to this home. Well, she's told that this home was picked out for her when she was younger and the man was still alive and he thought that she would love it, but she has no recollection of that at all. And so it becomes, who's telling the truth? Who's lying? Is there something sinister at play here? What's going on? And I just loved how it played out. It was incredibly sad by the end of it. I ended up, I was in tears as I was reading the final bits of this, just because it was just done so intelligently, I guess, in terms of how he set up this character and the progression of her way through these kind of final stages in life. This is a bit of a mediation on loneliness and what it is to get older. And I didn't know I needed this in my life right now, but I thought this was just beautiful. So I'll leave it there. Like I said, will not appeal to a lot of people, but I loved it. I ended up giving We Spread by Ian Reid 4.5 out of 5 stars. All right, so those were 4 recent reads here in it's not even early 2023. It's actually Q2 of 2023 now, which is insane. But those were the 4 that I've read so far this year. There were a couple other ones, but I decided not to talk about those in this video. But let me know down in the comments below, have you read any of these? And if so, did you like them? Did you like them any more than I did or any less than I did? Let me know what your thoughts are on these and any other books you've been reading or thinking about reading this year or anything else. I don't care what it's about. Any comments are always appreciated, so thank you so much for that support. And as always, if you guys enjoyed this one, please hit that like button down below. That engagement really does help me out. And like I always say, I don't just talk books, I talk all things media. Books, movies, video games, graphic novels, manga. If it's media related, I'm interested in it. And if you are too, you might consider subscribing. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for today. I just want to say thank you all so much for watching. And I want to encourage you to consume some media today. I'll catch you next time.